Welcome to another episode of Is It Finally Worth Playing? A series where I review games with troubled launches after months or years of patches, updates, or price drops. Here we're going to be focusing on the patches, the latest of which somewhat address one of my biggest issues with this game, which was the poor optimization at launch. The game runs considerably smoother now, but high to max settings still cause my GPU to overheat after lengthy sessions. But overall, this is a massive improvement from launch, even though it's still lacking a proper graphics settings menu with advanced options. Now this is in early access, so I'm going to do this a little bit differently than my regular reviews and give a singular detailed assessment instead of breaking it into two segments. This is a very complex game and there is a very limited bare bones tutorial here, and overall this game just does a very bad job of easing you into everything. There is a lot of important details, tips, lore, and backstory that this game either skips over completely or ultimately fails to explain. I understand that this is early access, but so much is missing here that it feels more like a beta or an alpha at times. To further elaborate, you have three different types of currencies and two different types of keys. Now this is very confusing early on because you don't know what requires what. The best way to describe this game is a combination of an extraction shooter and a roguelike. The way it's done here is honestly a troublesome mixture, with both systems ultimately undermining each other. To elaborate, extraction shooters tend to prioritize more thoughtful, strategic, and tactical gameplay for players to maximize their survival and extract with as much loot as possible. But the massive amount of enemies and the difficulty timer along with the danger meter don't really allow for this. You are forced to tackle objectives as quickly as possible to avoid being overwhelmed, and no amount of strategy can overcome the hordes of enemies thrown at you. Roguelikes, on the other hand, are a lot more fast-paced, with blind experimentation and trial and error being at the core of the gameplay loop. Usually, if your character dies in a roguelike, you're forced to start the game over completely, with none of your weapons or other upgrades you've managed to collect along the way, with procedurally generated levels ensuring that every run is different, forcing players to explore a new map and adapt to new circumstances. Now here's where Hyperlight Breakers is a little different. Things are broken into two categories here. You have runs and cycles. A run represents a single journey into the overgrowth. Think of it as a form of limited level selection, while a cycle represents the different versions of the overgrowth. Basically the next set of procedurally generated levels that you will see if you fail or succeed. Runs can end in one or two ways. You can either be defeated or extract. Every run is an opportunity to explore the overgrowth, gather resources, fight monsters, and generally become more powerful. Now you're free to go on as many runs as you like to complete the objective for the cycle if you successfully extract, but you can only die 4 times before the cycle ends and a new version of the overgrowth is created. Every time a breaker dies in a run, 1 point of durability is lost on every equipped item and weapon, with most having a maximum durability of 2 to 3 points. Items with 0 durability are immediately destroyed and there is no way to repair them. If you die 4 times, then another cycle starts over and you lose all your weapons and items. Combining these two genres in the way that Hyperlight Breakers does ultimately gives you a broken system that's constantly at odds with itself. Dying degrades your weapons and items quickly, often resulting in losing some of your best gear, while the difficulty timer and danger meter are constantly making the environment more dangerous to traverse the longer it takes you to complete your run. In order to challenge bosses, you need prisms. This is basically one of the two keys I mentioned earlier. Every time a prism is collected, it fills a large chunk of the danger meter, instantly triggering random events. Now these events can be as minor as mobs of enemies spawning, or they can be serious threats like assassins. Now assassins are basically just random bosses that spawn once you fill the danger meter, and in addition to all of this, you're given a limited amount of healing items for each cycle, so farming runs quickly becomes just as difficult as tackling objectives. Now this even carries over into your medkits. You can replenish your medkit one time at one shrine, but once you use all the shrines on the map, you can no longer replenish your medkit. This increases the difficulty exponentially, and in my opinion, it creates a system to where you can only have a productive run if you're willing to risk losing your loot almost every time you enter the overgrowth. And with the current level of difficulty and randomized loot, it's still very easy to fall into a negative loop of repeated failures. Let's move on to the combat. This is where the genre blending issues are on full display. This game is unforgivably hard with a limited amount of ammo and healing items against swarms of enemies that do massive amounts of damage. The latest update does show that the developers are attempting to fix this by rebalancing some of the enemies, increasing players' damage output, adding a higher density of healing items, and extraction now recovers 75 points of HP before the first wave of enemies. While this is definitely a step in the right direction, the game still has a number of conflicting design choices and balance issues that need to be addressed. It's constructed like a roguelike while also having enemies and bosses that can scale to even higher difficulties to drive the demand for the best loot. The problem with this is the penalty for failure is losing all of your loot, and it's very easy to fall into a perpetual cycle of failure because of the game's difficulty and structure. For example, you're expected to fight waves of enemies and a mini-boss to extract at the end of every run, while you're only able to carry one medkit. To me, it feels like a lot of the design choices here weren't playtested even after months of player feedback. So many things feel broken or underdeveloped. Multiplayer is supposed to help mitigate some of the difficulty here, but sadly I wasn't able to experience it because no one else was online. Now there is a parry system that will heal you for one successful parry per enemy. On paper this should help balance the game out, but in action it feels sluggish, out of place, and inconsistent. It's completely useless against mobs of enemies that frequently attack you in groups, one after the other, because it will only parry one singular target with a very small window of iframes afterwards. I will admit that it is useful for the much smaller, more controlled fights or the one-on-one fights with mini-bosses, but it still feels like it needs way more work when it comes to consistency and dependability. The melee combat overall still feels unrefined and wonky at times also, with certain weapons having far better tracking and hit registration than others. This makes losing those weapons even more frustrating, leaving you at the mercy of the RNG loot system. Now you do have the option to buy weapons from the vendors, but their selection is randomly generated as well. You also have vendors that offer permanent upgrades, but the ones that really make a difference require currency that is locked behind the completion of boss battles, which is a tall order for most players to accomplish solo. In closing, my biggest issue with this game is the difficulty. It's based almost entirely around luck in my opinion. Certain cycles or runs have more difficult enemies and considerably worse loot. I literally had a cycle to where I only found guns and all of them sucked. So from my experience, you ultimately just keep failing till you eventually get lucky. Your survivability and progress are completely dependent on the loot you find along with the speed and efficiency of your runs. Nothing else seems to matter. Even with that being said, despite its flaws, I actually do like this game. It has a beautiful art style, a nice variety of weapons, and even some of the things I complained about earlier feel more unfinished than outright bad. I would like to applaud Heart Machine's ambition and acknowledge the brief flashes of brilliance I experienced while playing this. There are times to where everything clicks and it feels great. You know, it feels like nothing else on the market. It's like a mixture of Borderlands and Division in the best way possible while also just doing its own thing. I really think what's going to be the missing piece to this, obviously aside from polish, much more polish, is just a story. I feel like if it has some type of strong narrative to pull this all together, this is going to be a fantastic game. But as of right now, I have somewhat of a hard time recommending it because it's just so hard. And I feel like it's hard because it has some broken design choices that I feel like they're slowly working towards fixing. The biggest issue that I see here is that they really want to retain this high level of difficulty, but they don't really understand that they have these two different genres mashed together that are kind of cannibalizing one another when it comes to a fun experience. I can recommend this to someone if they see it at a discount. If you really like what you see, if you think you have friends that are gonna play this with you, I can recommend this at a discount. But at full price, I'm gonna say wait. It's still too early. It still needs more time. But this is the beauty of an early access title. It's going to still keep getting support and it's going to continue to grow. So I'm definitely going to revisit this once it starts, getting a bit better than what it is now and it starts nearing to release. You guys let me know what y'all think of the video. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll be back with another video. Peace.